We're talking about obesity today. It's the second biggest killer in the United States. I'm here with Alistair Payne. And Alistair, tell us a little bit about your credentials and what you're working on when it comes to obesity.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. And my name is, Dr. Alistair Payne. I studied neuroscience at university and then went on to study a Ph.D. in adipose tissue function. And I now work as a research fellow looking at how the brain controls appetite and trying to identify new treatments for obesity.
Okay, and where's that field taking you right now? What's the direction that you're going with obesity treatments?
So we're kind of looking at all sorts of different obesity treatments, but the real focus in the last few years has really looked at how the brain regulates appetite and how we can try and kind of manipulate that or stimulate that to suppress appetite as a way of treating obesity.
And I mean, I can imagine that is a pretty vast field. Is it something specific that you're looking at there? What are you looking for in the brain?
Yeah, so we kind of look at really how serotonin has a role in appetite regulation and how it kind of influences the pathways that control appetite.
Serotonin, that's a word that we hear quite a lot. It's quite a famous hormone, that is it. Can you tell us a little bit about serotonin?
It is. It's a kind of widely produced hormone within the body. It's really key as a neurotransmitter and is used a lot as a neurotransmitter. But is also produced in the periphery to regulate a lot of metabolic function in the periphery as well.
Okay, is it just produced in the brain? Is that where it comes from?
So it's not. It's actually mainly produced in the gut. So around 95% of serotonin is actually produced in the intestines and in the gut. But there is a smaller subset of neurons in the brain that produce serotonin for function in the brain as a transmitter in the brain.
Because it's in the gut, is that why you're looking at it as something that might be connected to obesity?
Well, partly yes and partly no. It's actually really interesting that in terms of appetite regulation, it's actually the serotonin that's produced in the brain that's really key in the regulation of appetite. So
even though the gut is full of serotonin?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So if we kind of lose the serotonin in the gut, that doesn't actually affect our appetite regulation. So what we've found is actually it's really the serotonin in the brain that's really controlling that appetite regulation.
Is it a trigger for appetite? It makes your brain produces serotonin and that's a signal to be hungry, or?
So actually what it's doing is it's suppressing appetite. So when we see food and eat food, and a lot of the signals from the gut and the periphery signaling to the brain induces the production of serotonin. And what we find is that serotonin actually right in the very middle of the brain, a kind of really key region that regulates appetite, stimulates neurons to suppress appetite. So it reduces your feeling of hunger, increases kind of satiety, and increases energy expenditure.
I see. Okay. How can what causes you to produce serotonin? Because it's linked to happiness, right?
It is, yeah, and that might be part of it. There might be that kind of reward feeling from having food and ingesting food, but also a lot of the signaling hormones that are produced when you consume food actually signal to the brain and induce an production of serotonin.
What other hormones does your body make when you eat food?
So there's loads. It's quite a complex system. A lot of them are produced in the gut as you kind of take food in. So some of the key ones are glucagon-like peptide 1 that's produced sort of in the lower intestines, in the large intestine, and in the lower part of the small intestine, and other things like peptide YY and glucose-dependent insulin-tropic polypeptide,
wow,
which is quite a mouthful. But all these hormones are kind of are released or produced in the gut when you eat food, and they signal throughout the body to different tissues as well as the brain to kind of suppress that appetite and trigger this kind of uptake and storage or metabolism of energy as you consume it.
I see. And with your research, so you're looking specifically at serotonin, right? do all these other hormones really get in the way when you're trying to study serotonin, because they must have all kinds of effects, variables?
Yeah, I mean, I think we forget that it's such a complex system, and we try and simplify it all the time, especially in the brain, to try and understand what's going on. But it is a real balancing act, and there's so many different parts contributing to that, to these kind of regulatory pathways, that you kind of have to consider everything and see what these. Yeah.
And of course that's so there's hormones, but then if you were to produce some kind of medicine for obesity in the future, also the lifestyle and other drugs that people take would probably affect that as well, would they? Or I mean, can lifestyle affect serotonin levels? What you ingest, other drugs you're taking?
Yeah, no, and they do, and I think what we try and find is, a lot of these drugs and pathways are quite separate. So we kind of try and find very specific things that are regulating appetite, so that we can target them to treat obesity without having any side effects or any other.
How do you go about finding it?
So it's tricky. A lot of studies now, we look at kind of how genetics plays a role, and we can kind of find a lot of trends in genetics that kind of identify things that we should maybe target for obesity treatment. We can kind of look at what are called genome-wide association studies, that are really huge studies where we see we kind of have the genetics of a person, and also a lot about their lifestyle and things that if they're overweight or they're underweight. And then we try and find genes that are similar between many people that have the same kind of phenotype, that kind of helps us identify something that might be causing obesity or causing leanness, that we can then target to kind of develop a drug.
So are you seeing trends then? There's trends visible with people, or is a certain type of person or all people?
Yeah, it's kind of a mix. We kind of look for disease states particularly. It's kind of very clear when there's just one gene that's causing a disease. You can see that very clearly. But sometimes we kind of try and look for more subtle things. Something that we work on a bit as well is trying to find lean genes, people that actually have a lower BMI, are very lean.
I would like some lean genes.
Yeah. I think, yeah.
Have you actually found that? Is it visible?
Oh yeah. So we have a couple of genes that we found that are actually strongly associated with having a lower BMI.
So some people are just predisposed to being lean. It's in their genes.
Yeah, absolutely. As some people are also predisposed to being obese and having a higher BMI. And that has kind of helped us identify a lot of the pathways that then regulate obesity and appetite.
But let me jump in there. So I've often seen, people criticizing others on the internet saying, just eat less. All you need to do is put less in than you expend, or what have you, and then that will keep the weight down. But you would say that you can actually see it is a genetic. People are predisposed to that.
Yeah, there's definitely some genes that we found that are strongly associated with obesity. And probably the best example of that is one of the melanocortin system genes that's known as the melanocortin 4 receptor. Now, this is one of the major regulators of appetite. It's probably the most important regulator of appetite in the hypothalamus. And when there's a mutation in this system, people have basically no suppression of appetite. So they're constantly hungry and they always want to eat. And that really is not a choice of people just eating more. They really cannot fight that urge. There's a really fun study which actually looked at Labradors, and they found that actually 25% roughly of Labradors have a mutation in this gene. And that's one of the reasons why they're so trainable and they're always looking for food and really interested in food.
Really?
Yeah.
They're driven by food?
Yeah, because they have this kind of dysregulation in their control of their appetite.
I wonder if we went back 150 years ago, before we had supermarkets and convenience food, junk food available to us, people would be, there would be a certain group of people who'd still be predisposed to being hungry all the time. They just didn't have access to the food, right?
Absolutely. And actually, evolutionarily, that's actually a big advantage. If you can store more fat and more fuel to burn when you're in a state of starvation, that's really advantageous. It's the people that maybe necessarily couldn't store a lot of fat that then wouldn't survive in regions of starvation.
Wow, my mind is blown. That's fascinating because obviously that's not an advantage nowadays because we have access to as much food as we want. And this is what brings you here, because that advantage from the past is now causing an epidemic, obesity.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why, or is thought to be why, obesity has become such a huge issue over the last few years. It's about the kind of environment that we live in, with really easy access to all types of food and very high calorie food, and really very little requirement to do any sort of exercise. If you can drive to work and sit at work and drive home and buy and eat as much food as you like, that kind of environment really kind of fosters that development of obesity and people just not having to burn off any energy or find food.
In your studies, have you looked into the nutrition side of things? Do you strictly look at neural pathways and that sort of thing as well?
So I kind of focus on neuronal pathways and really that part of appetite regulation, but it's kind of all tied in. We do to some lesser degree. Obviously, there's a lot of the metabolism of all types of foodstuffs relates to then what signals to the brain and what controls appetite. So we do to a slight degree. Yeah.
What sort of foodstuffs would cause a strong signal to the brain or a weak signal? Is there certain things that are more of a trigger than others?
Well, I think one of the key triggers, I guess, is glucose, and I think a lot of the regulation of appetite and metabolism is really focused around glucose as a primary fuel source. But I think all food sources, fats and proteins, are kind of broken down to that level for metabolism anyway. But yeah, glucose, I guess.
Is there a dance that's being played between hunger and satiety?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can imagine it as a sort of yin and yang situation, and this part of the center of the brain is really where that's happening. It's that one side trying to stimulate hunger and the other side suppressing hunger, and that's why it's such a key region in controlling appetite and metabolism.
Yeah. Before you came in, actually, I because I knew we were going to be talking about serotonin, I looked up some facts on serotonin, and I also read that it plays a little dance with dopamine as well.
Yeah. So I mean, it gets quite complicated in the brain. There are quite a few neurotransmitters that are kind of all involved in these pathways going back and forth. Dopamine being one of them. That kind of other kind of happy neurotransmitter, if you like. But all of them are playing a part, and we kind of forget that it's such a complex system. I always try and bring it back down to that basic of, stimulating hunger or suppressing hunger. But we kind of always forget that there's 86 billion neurons in the brain that are working. So it's not as simple as kind of yes and no one way or the other. There's many parts playing a role in this.
So every time you act on one part, it has a knock-on effect to another part.
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, they still function to carry out the processes. So one kind of side always is always more dominant depending on what's going on in the body. But yeah, there's many other brain regions that are playing into this as well. A kind of good example of that is the hindbrain. There's an area in the hindbrain that also senses a lot of these hormones.
Where's the hindbrain? What is that?
So it's kind of right at the back of the brain, almost on the brain stem as it starts to go down the neck.
Okay.
And it's one of the major relay centers for a lot of signals, particularly nerves and mechanical signals coming in from the body, but also regulates a lot of these, responds to a lot of these hormones circulating, and then is a relay center for a lot of the nerves then going back out the brain and the signals going back out the brain. And that also plays a part in trying to regulate the other systems in the brain to balance appetite. So
Wow.
there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on in there.
Yeah.
One of the interesting facts I read before you came in, because as I said, I was looking into serotonin, was people who take cocaine, they have this surge in dopamine that makes them feel good. And I read that it's serotonin that actually brings them down.
That's really interesting.
Is that news to you? I read it on the internet, and it could be completely false, but that was the report that I read, that serotonin would, even though it's kind of a happiness hormone, it brings people down from a high.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I don't know much about that, if I'm honest, but I think it's really interesting how what that kind of taking those kind of drugs, how that affects all these pathways and the imbalance of it.
I don't think it's going to be good.
No, it's not going to be good.
It's not going to help you.
But yeah, I mean, it must really mess up a lot of these regulatory pathways.
Absolutely. Speaking to you has really been an eye opener, because one of the sports that I was very involved in my life was boxing.
Yeah,
and knowing that there's 86 billion neural pathways
that's cells
in the brain.
Yeah, so they actually make thousands of connections with each other. So there are really actually trillions of connections within the brain regulating everything.
A knock to the head's not going to help all these connections.
No.
Much.
No, definitely not.
I mean, there's a lot of research now into concussion in sport, and that's linked to things like Alzheimer's, dementia. Does any of your research take you down that route? Like, I mean, these hormones, are they also linked to dementia, Alzheimer's, anything like that, or?
Yeah, they are, and actually, a lot of these hormones are. Because these are kind of the major neurotransmitters, a lot of these diseases are linked, and there's definitely strong associations or correlations between a lot of these diseases. So yeah, there's definitely something going on there, and yeah.
But you're not looking for that.
No, I mean, I don't particularly focus on research on that, but I know there is a lot of work going on in that, and particularly in terms of metabolic health and Alzheimer's disease and dementia diseases. There is a huge amount of work looking at the association between those.
Is there anything that you found that's really surprised you in your work?
I think there are kind of many moments like that in science. I think when we're trying to discover new things and when something works, even if that's just a simple seeing a co-expression of neurons or something in the brain, that kind of always happens where you kind of get excited that you've found something new. So I think that kind of happens all the time.
Where is your research taking you right now that's going to help with obesity?
So I think what we're trying to do is trying to find drugs that can target the brain to suppress appetite. And we're kind of working with different companies as well to kind of see what those drugs do, so we can better understand what they're actually doing and how they're suppressing appetite within the brain. So a lot of that's kind of trying to work out that circuitry, but that helps us really understand what these drugs are doing and how, and as a consequence, how safe they are, and kind of how, so we know better about how they're actually working in the body.
I can imagine there's a lot of success and failure with that, because what we've talked about earlier with other hormones, lifestyle, all these kind of things, when you're trying to develop a drug, there must be no end of stumbling block.
Yeah, I think that's true. And you kind of hit on some drugs that are really good and effective, and you kind of latch onto those and kind of develop them further. There's been a couple of new obesity drugs relatively recently that target that mimic GLP-1, which is one of those hormones produced in the gut. And these have been really effective and are actually in clinical use. And
are they approved or they are?
Yeah, no, they're approved in the US, and they're starting to become approved in the UK as well. And these kind of mimic these hormones to suppress appetite. So yeah, there's a lot of those coming through, and a kind of we're now looking at combinations of drugs as well that mimic different hormones to try and suppress appetite. And some of these are really, really useful and really good. There's one currently in clinical trials that mimics GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon.
Just what GLP-1? Just remind us what that is again.
So this is glucagon-like peptide 1. It's produced in the gut and suppresses appetite and increases pancreatic secretion and things like that.
Okay, pancreatic secretion would be insulin.
So it's mainly, that's it. That's mainly insulin. So insulin is obviously one of the really key regulators of glucose metabolism, and also that regulation of appetite in the brain.
Okay, I mean, insulin is something I'm quite interested in. I've read a few books about obesity, and from what I understand, people with high insulin levels tend to be obese, predominantly.
Yeah, so this is kind of a consequence of obesity, where we get development of diabetes. So type 2 diabetes really comes when adipose tissue and other tissues around the body start to become resistant to insulin. And insulin normally signals the uptake and metabolism of glucose circulating around. So as fat tissue particularly becomes overfilled, and it stops responding to insulin, and therefore you get hyperglycemia, very high glucose levels. And as a short response to that, you end up getting very high insulin levels as well, as the pancreas is trying to make more insulin or secrete more insulin. So these tissues respond and uptake glucose from the bloodstream.
Would GLP-1 increase in secretions from the pancreas? Is that not counterproductive then? You're increasing your insulin production, or
so
not?
Not necessarily. So what actually then happens in a further development of type 2 diabetes, the pancreas then can't cope with the amount of insulin it's producing, and actually insulin levels drop very low. So you have very high glucose levels but very low insulin levels.
I see.
But also insulin will be acting in the brain to suppress appetite. So if you have very low insulin levels as well, it's also not working in terms of those appetite regulatory pathways either.
So insulin suppressing appetite in the brain, also serotonin can. Is there anything else that's suppressing appetite, or are those the two key hormones that would do that?
Well, there's lots. I think serotonin is only part of that kind of neuronal network that's regulating it, but all those hormones produced in the gut are regulating appetite. There are other circulating hormones as well, produced by adipose tissue, for example. One of those key hormones being leptin, that's produced, that also suppresses appetite. And there are leptin receptors in the brain that suppress appetite. So there are loads, yeah. So
given all these appetite suppressors, your main focus is on serotonin. So where are you with that then? You're trying to get a drug to the market, or not at that stage yet?
So we're kind of, particularly with our work into serotonin, we're trying to look at really more about how the pathways are regulating appetite and what serotonin does within that process. There was a drug that was available in the United States known as lorcaserin for quite a while, which was a serotonin 2C receptor agonist, and that is basically mimicking that role of serotonin in suppressing appetite. That's not currently on the market at the moment, but we're kind of there's more work going into that, and we're kind of trying to better understand exactly what that pathway is.
So you're writing papers on this? Do these you write papers, send them to journals?
Yeah, write papers, sending them to journals.
How does that work? What's the process there?
That's the academic life. So we write a lot of papers. So we submit them to academic journals. They're then reviewed by peer reviewers. Normally, at least 3 peer reviewers review our papers. They come back to us with many comments and suggestions, and we either go away and do more experiments or kind of debate with them what we think's going on. And then, after quite a lengthy process of peer review, the articles are published. Yeah.
It fills me with confidence that it's rigorous. You know, I mean, nothing's getting passed without, very, very rigorous oversight.
Yeah, and I guess because you're sending this to other people that are also scientists and kind of have that same mindset and their own opinions of what's going on as well, it tends to be very vigorous. So they're often trying to find problems in what you've done.
They're going to try and break it.
Yeah, absolutely. They're going to try and break it. So
like a pressure test on your work,
Yeah.
And have you had a number of papers? What have you had published? Has there been anything published in any journals?
Yeah, no, I've got a few papers published. We're one just at the beginning of this year, end of last year, that looked at some of this circuitry in the hindbrain and how serotonin interacts with GLP-1 and what that part of that circuit is. So
that's good. I mean, you must be pleased when you get a paper peer reviewed and published.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great feeling. It's really nice to get the work out. I think you spend quite a lot of time researching these things. So it's really nice to have that kind of out within the public for people to.
I could imagine that serotonin levels must go up when you're when you get published.
Yes, definitely.
I mean, speaking of that, having looked at the brain and hormones, what makes you happy, how you feel, do you do anything in your own life to try and make sure that you're not stressed or keep yourself happy? Or are you wary of that because you study it?
I don't think I'm necessarily more aware of that, though I study it. But yeah, I think it's really important. I think I try and keep a good work-life balance. I think a lot of academics struggle with that a lot. They're kind of, when you're very passionate and working on those kind of things, you get very kind of bogged down in the work and very stuck in it. So yeah, I think it's really important to have a good work-life balance. Go and do other things.
What do you do? What do you do to unwind?
Oh, I do. I really like singing, so I do quite a lot of music.
I never knew.
Yeah, and a bit of sport as well. Yeah, I'm quite a keen sailor, so yeah, sailing too.
Okay, what kind of singing?
So it's very much kind of classical music, a lot of choral singing. Yeah.
Wow. I never knew. That's great. And you sail also?
I sail as well, yes.
In the North Sea?
Yeah. It's quite challenging. It's quite cold.
What kind of boat? I mean, just like a one man?
Yeah, little sailing dinghies, so 1 or 200.
Competitively?
Boats, yeah, semi-competitively. I've kind of yes. I used to sail for the university team. I'm a bit more chilled.
Where did you go to uni?
So I actually went to uni in Aberdeen. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
And is that what got you into sailing?
No, I sailed before actually. I started sailing. Sorry, I kind of grew up on the west coast of Scotland, and I started sailing at a fairly young age, kind of early teens then, and the west coast.
Whereabouts on the west coast?
So that's in Fort William. Yeah, where I
Fort William.
Yeah.
Okay, if anyone's listening, especially for the American audience, you need to visit Fort William because it's a beautiful place, really stunning place. Home to Ben Nevis, the highest mountain in Scotland, and a great place for outdoor pursuits. Mountain biking downhill. I think they have the World Championships of downhill mountain biking there.
They do indeed. The World Championships, the mountain biking, every year. And yeah, capital outdoor of the UK apparently. So yeah,
I'm not surprised. It's an incredible place. And if you're in that area, then just visit the whole area. We went earlier this year to Kinloch Rannoch.
Oh yeah,
which is the next is over the mountains from Fort William. Now the bird could probably fly. It's from Rannoch Station. Probably it's 7 to 10 miles
Yeah,
something like that over the hills.
Yeah.
But to drive it, it's about 2.5 hours because you have to drive around all the mountains, and it's a hard drive, that.
Yeah, it is. It's quite, it can be quite isolated out there, but yeah, it kind of protects that natural beauty, I guess.
Yeah, but great growing up there because
Fantastic.
you have a life in the outdoors.
Yeah. No, it was really magical.
Mm-hmm. Where do you hope to be with your work 10 years from now? What would make you happy? What would be a success?
Well, I think real success is having identified really how these pathways control appetite and coming up with new ways to treat obesity. It's clearly not going away, and we definitely need new treatments to come up with. So I think really success in the future looks at having developed new treatments, new options for people to treat their obesity. And that will be a kind of mixed model. It will definitely still involve diet and exercise, but it's about how we can kind of supplement them to really control obesity.
How far away is that?
I don't think we're too far away. A lot of the new obesity treatments that are in development are looking at 20 to 30% weight loss with some of these drugs. So,
wow.
Yeah, so we're not actually miles away, I don't think.
Okay.
We're getting there.
These treatments, do you think that are they coupled with lifestyle change, or do these treatments just work without lifestyle change?
A lot of them will work independent of lifestyle change, but I think lifestyle change is important in trying to treat obesity. I think you don't want to be too dependent on these drugs, and a lot of them, if you come off the treatment, you may regain that weight. So I think they should supplement a kind of healthier lifestyle, and I think they give you the opportunity to reduce your body weight, and alongside, being able then to change your diet and exercise more. Well,
Alistair Payne, thank you so much for coming on the show, and hopefully we can have you on again sometime in the future.
It's been absolutely great. Thanks for having me, and I'd be delighted to come back. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thanks.